All right, welcome to Witchpolice Radio. Once again, I always like to say this as a disclaimer that I'm in my pantry. It's kind of my secondary recording location, and I know that people, who are listening to this can't see all the cans and boxes and everything around me, but it sounds good in here, and I kind of like recording in here actually. So I'm here in my pantry online with someone who has not been on the show before, but I don't want to say I've been familiar with your work, but the name has been familiar. Definitely heard of you, and
Cool.
I think since hearing of you and wanting to kind of look into more about what you do, I've definitely kind of delved into a lot of it, and I think that you're someone interesting to talk to on this show in the sense that what you do is very different than a lot of the kind of more straight ahead bands or singers, songwriters, things like that, right? That I have
Sure.
on the podcast. So
Yeah.
you're still doing something very creative, very artistic, very much could be considered music in a bit of a different way than, again, some of these other artists I have on here. But
Right.
I think the best way to sort of get this started is if you want to introduce yourself and maybe just give a bit of background about what you do, because again, I think it's something very different.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So my name is Cole Peters. I'm currently based in Winnipeg, been in Winnipeg for a while, did a brief stint in London, UK, but yeah, most of my life been here in Winnipeg. I'm sort of consider myself like a visual and sound artist. So I work in a few mediums. The past year or two has been primarily in sound. And in terms of work in sound, it's largely focused between field recording.
Mm-hmm.
So just going out into the world and recording sounds and then coming back home into the home studio. And, there's different approaches that people take to field recording. Some it might be more like a musique concrète approach where you're doing a lot of chopping up and sort of reconfiguring that sound. Another approach is to do sort of more just collage and letting the recordings breathe a little bit more on their own. I sort of fall in between those two camps. And then additionally, I do a fair bit of sort of exploration of sort of analog synthesis, not really in sort of, I guess, the more traditional musical sense, but more of like a textural sense. I guess that's sort of the bird's eye view of everything. Yeah.
Cool. So, I mean, let's just go back to the field recording stuff, because I think that, that's something that I think makes sense on one level, but then the idea of recording something just when you're out and getting some kind of sounds that are happening in the world, and then finding a way to turn those into an art piece. I think that's the part that maybe a lot of people would be sort of confused on how that works. So when you're out and you have your recorder with you, what are you looking for? Are you actually seeking out certain sounds that you know are going to be something that inspires and kind of works well towards creating a larger piece?
Well, some of the time, yeah. When I started out doing field recording, it was almost more akin to almost what you might consider like a Foley art, where you're making specific sounds. So for me, I might have had a piece that I'd made primarily starting on a synthesizer, and I might think of a sound that I wanted that I couldn't make electronically.
Okay.
So, I might go out and bang some metal around or something like that. I've not been doing so much of that recently. Lately, it's been a lot more kind of just about exploring sort of the sound world out there and just seeing what I encounter.
Okay.
I think especially since COVID and, being in a situation where you just spend a lot of time inside in your own place, I've been really keen to find other ways to be out in the world and exploring it. So that's been a really, really interesting way to sort of find a new, I guess, appreciation for what's out there.
Well, you mentioned as far as the synthesizer stuff too, is that you're looking for textures. Is that sort of the same thing that you're looking for when it comes to field recordings? Is more of a, I guess, like a vibe than an actual specific sound or tone?
It is, yeah. And increasingly, I'm kind of just going to spots that seem like they may have an interesting sonic character to them without necessarily having an idea of what that might be. But yeah, primarily texture is really something that I find pretty fascinating. But it can also be almost like verging on melodic.
Sure.
A few months back, I was, sort of looking for sounds in a parking lot. They've been really interesting to be in when there are no people around. It's just sort of hearing sort of like the room tone almost of the parking lot. Okay. And I guess there was some, maybe some cleaning going on, and there was just this hum going through the whole parking lot. That when I came back and listened to it, I mean, it sounded like a drone piece. There were all of these sort of microtones just floating through it. So yeah, texture is definitely a big part of it, but yeah, also just tone and vibe. There's, it's surprising how much we hear of that on an everyday basis, but don't actually register as, musical.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and a lot of that in more traditional music, that's taken out.
Right,
They're
exactly.
removing the hum, they're removing the ambient noise in the background to make the music more pure sounding, and you're sort of doing it in the reverse way, where you're getting
Yeah,
all that noise detritus, if you want to call it, and turning that into something. So what
yeah.
I mean, I've listened to your stuff, and I've listened to other things that are I would consider to be similar,
Mm.
in just conceptually. But and I know what sounds good to me, although unlike with, like, a pop record or a jazz record or a hip hop record, I can't explain what it is that I like about it. What makes this stuff good? Like, I mean, to you as a listener, I mean, I don't mean to seem like completely ignorant of the
No, 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 no,
genre,
of
but you know what
course.
I mean. Like, it definitely seems on the surface like, okay, I have a recorder, I could go out and record some noise and some
Yeah.
sound and some ambient world, background sounds, and then, but what makes that act into an actual piece? Like, I guess, how do you know when you've hit on something that really works for you as a
I
creative?
mean, in a funny way, it's almost the same thing. When I hear something where I make a recording and I register it as being good, a lot of the time I can't really quantify what it is. It's sort
Sure.
of like you can boil it down just like you could with pop music. Maybe you can say, well, it has a really catchy hook or something like that. But it's like, well, what makes a catchy hook? I don't know. Like, it makes me want to jam. I don't know.
Right.
With a field recording, it's almost the same way. And there's a lot of times where I might go out to have I might have a sound in mind when I go out, and again, that doesn't happen too often. But I might think of a place and think, oh, that place must sound really cool. And when I get there, it doesn't sound
Right.
interesting.
Right.
So I think it's really hard to quantify that sort of thing. One of the sort of top artists in my mind working with field recording, Lawrence English, has written a lot about what he refers to as field recording being an exercise in conveying the listener's listening.
Okay.
And so he talks a lot about what does it mean to be able to convey to another listener what it's like to be the recordist listening to something interesting.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah.
And that exists on like a technological level, or I guess a technical level, in terms of selecting the microphones that best convey what you're listening to. But again, a lot of the time it's an almost indescribable thing, which I think is quite similar to music. I mean, I can't tell you why I like exactly listening to really textural bass music. It just
Sure.
sounds good to me, right? So
Yeah, it does. It does. So
I
whatever
mean,
it
it's
is,
hard to
you,
hard to stick a pin in it for
yeah,
sure.
yeah. Well, is there emotion in field recordings? I mean,
Mm,
I'm sure there is, because music in general, any genre really, that's sort of the hook for a lot of people, is they feel something, whether it's something direct from lyrics, or something sonic, or something just kind of elemental from just like the sound that's coming into their body in some fashion. Like,
yeah.
do you find feeling in these sounds, and like, do you feel like you're conveying emotions when making
Mm,
these, like, you put out a tape? Are there, to you, feelings in this? Like, are
yeah.
there, I don't want to say are there sad songs and happy songs, because that's really
Yeah.
dumbing it down, but you know what I mean, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there can be an aspect of that. I think I mean, I've certainly listened to some field recording albums where there is an emotional content to it. Patricia Wolf is an artist who recently did an album recording sounds around Mount St. Helens,
Okay.
and sort of capturing how the sort of the biome in that area had sort of come back to life from sort of this disastrous ecological situation. And when you listen to those recordings, I mean, and this may be influenced by the fact that the content or the context going into it, right?
Yeah.
But there's this sort of like interesting, hopeful sense to a lot of the sounds.
Okay.
There are other albums I've listened to where it does feel quite heavy, like if it's something looking at there's one artist, Peter, I'm blanking on his last name, did a recording called Recording of Dangerous Places.
Okay.
And so he's gone into places like Chernobyl or oil fields, and it's all these very sort of, industrial type sounds. And there is, you get a sort of a dreaded, like a dangerous vibe, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
In terms of what I'm doing, again, I think there's maybe, I hesitate to use the word a politics to it. I mean, I am interested in things like ecology and, climate change, as so many people are. And
Sure.
there is an aspect of that, I think, in some of the field recording work I've done. But for me, I think my primary interest in sound is always the physicality of it. And that might be, in a more musical sense, I'm really interested in the sensation of feeling, really deep bass pressures when a piece is played. I'm really interested in just the way sounds modulate over time. That might sound really dry and analytical, but I'm interested in the way that those effects can help, or I guess the way that they can influence the way that you perceive things in the world.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, does it? I guess like another thing that I've always wondered about this kind of stuff is you're putting it on tape, which is great. As someone who loves cassettes, I'm happy to see that. It looks like you sold a lot of them already, which is great. So obviously people are checking out what you're doing.
Yeah.
Is there a sound quality aspect to it? I mean, when you're putting something on a tape, one of the biggest knocks people have on tapes, especially DIY tapes, is that the quality is not as good as it could be on whatever file format or anything. Personally, I don't care about that. I like to just hear something in whatever format is available, and then I'm happy. But I know that exists, right? When you're doing something that's not as obviously, I mean, with more traditional music, it's clear what kind of sound you want to get out of that, and what you want to be, what fidelity and everything you want to put onto the tape or onto the CD or into the whatever, right? But is that an aspect here, or is does format matter? I mean, like, is tape sort of the preferred format for music like this?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have a long-standing love of tape. Back in the day, I worked with Chris Jackson doing Prairie Fire tapes.
Oh yeah, right on. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I definitely have a long-standing interest in that. And when I was doing more noise-based work, tape for me was like the bee's knees. Like it just sounded fantastic, like the way it saturates when you really drive the recording. And so it almost became a bit of a default for me. So the tape that I did on Grisai and then the new one on McCade's Star, format was part of the consideration, but also I was more interested in just the labels themselves and the platform, and sort of just the artistic lineup that existed on those labels. And with Brett on McCade's Star, being able to work with someone locally was really awesome as well. Increasingly, though, I mean, I've been getting more and more technical in how I record, and I've been wondering whether tape is the best format for it. I'm certainly, I'm really happy with the way releases have gone, but as I've been focusing more and more on things like really delicate sounds, especially in those higher frequencies, like tape, just, in terms of the frequency range it can record, doesn't really help that sort of sound out very much. So I think probably in future I'll be doing more CD. If vinyl comes up as a possibility at some point, that'd be awesome. But I mean, it has been really interesting to negotiate, the formats that I'm familiar with versus, what's actually required of the material that I've been doing more and more of.
For sure. Just a second. So, the tape label, McCade Star, is that what it's called?
Yep.
I've seen that before. I think I have a Greenhouse release on that label.
Yeah.
So what is the story behind that? Because I definitely have seen tapes with that logo on it, like appearing randomly. Is it a local label?
It is, yeah. So it's run by Brett Parento. He performs as BP. So he's worked with field recording a fair bit, but also like more harsh noise, power electronics. He used to run a label called Male Activity.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so
heard of that one too, for sure.
Yeah. He offered to put it out along with his recent batch with 3 or 4 other tapes that are also fantastic. But I've always appreciated the DIY spirit, and being able to work with a local tape label again was a real plus. But yeah, probably Brett can fill you in on more on the background of that than I can.
Right, right. Well, I guess that kind of leads to a question though. What is the community like for this kind of stuff? I mean, there obviously are other artists doing. I mean, especially when you get to the harsher sort of side of things, right?
Yeah.
There's people definitely creating music that is not traditionally seen as music, right?
Yeah,
And especially using all kinds of interesting techniques and field recordings and things like that. So, is there a good scene like within Manitoba for this kind of music?
Yeah, you know, and it might be surprising to someone who's maybe not from Manitoba and sort of just sees like the population from the outside. Like, surely there's not enough people here to support a thriving experimental music scene. But that scene has been one of my most treasured parts of being in Winnipeg for a long time. We actually just wrapped up. I was playing at Send and Receive, which is like an international experimental music festival that happens here every year. And so, I mean, that alone, I think stands as a very strong testament of, you know, just how much interest there is here, which again, is a little bit unexpected for a city of our size, I think, but there is like a lot of really deep interest here, I find, even in the more sort of, you know, non-music formats like field recording or, you know, more broadly sound art.
Yeah. Do you think that kind of the appeal of that comes from sort of the city's punk background and the DIY aspect of things? Because that, I mean, that seems like one of the strongest through lines, regardless of genre in Winnipeg and Manitoba, is that there's this like desire to just make shit, you know, like regardless of what it is. And I don't know if it's any different than other cities, but I get the impression that people here are very much willing to just jump in and do something.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think I can't speak to the punk background.
Not so much like sonically, but aesthetically, you know, like
no, for sure. I mean, I think part of it is the fact that, you know, for half of the year we're, you know, trapped in -30 weather with, you know, nothing else to do. So you kind of have to develop some hobbies or, you know, just get bored all the time. But certainly, I mean, way back in the day, I was more involved in like the hip hop scene here, and it was also like very like DIY, just get shit done. And so, I mean, I think that's the case through a lot of genres here, and the experimental side of things is you know, just as much a part of that. I think, I mean, there's also, I find like a lot of crossover between a lot of the scenes. So I feel like there's a lot of cross-pollination of people just being excited to do shit, you know?
Yeah. Well, and especially now too, with the pandemic, you know, still ongoing, but things are sort of opening up a bit. You just wanted to go and see shit too, not just even create. Like you want to just go and see anyone performing anything, and it's just exciting because it's been so long.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Well, you mentioned earlier that, you know, like this part of this project has been the fact that you've been stuck in during the pandemic and you want to go out and sort of find new ways to explore just like the world, right? What has this been like as far as being a creative person otherwise though? I mean, because it seems like a lot of people are one or the other side of the coin, where they've been either super creative and super motivated and they've had all these great ideas, and then other people have been completely blocked and they spent the whole pandemic just like struggling to do anything creative because the situation around them is sort of sucking the life out of and the creativity out of them. What is your position been on that?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. I've definitely been more creative and more productive since the pandemic, which is, I mean, I think not uncommon, but still feels just really weird.
Yeah, sure. I know. I agree with you. Yeah.
I mean, I remember, I think it was 2 or 3 months into the start of this, I just self-produced my first album again on tape, and it was the first piece of music I'd put out in, you know, 4 or 5 years. And here I was announcing at the start of the pandemic, like, hey, I know the world's really shit, but does anyone want to buy music? Like, just this really weird vibe, you know? But I definitely found more and more people who were, you know, feeling the same way. I think for me, I mean, I'm very much an introvert. So even before the pandemic, I never had a packed social schedule. But now especially, right? Like there's just so fewer things to do and fill your time with. On the flip side, I think I've also had periods during the past 2 years where I've had too much time to spend on it. And I just end up hitting these like creative roadblocks where I'm spending so much time focusing on a project that I just, you know, run out of ideas and run out of steam. So it's been a weird back and forth, but largely I've definitely felt a lot more creative. And I think part of that also just strives from, or derives from all of us having to look at the world a little bit more closely, right? Again, not having much to do. There's so many things happening on the world stage that we might not otherwise paying as much attention to. So there's been a stronger drive for me to respond to a lot of those things from an artistic standpoint in one way or another.
Well, I think it also has opened up people to discovering new types of art that maybe they wouldn't have previously checked out because they have time now, right? So you could just, before you'd be sticking to the same 4 or 5 things you knew you loved. And then, unless you were super adventurous, you wouldn't really stray from that. But now people have had just all this heaps of time to just kind of dig into new things. So I imagine that's helped, generate interest in genres of music and other types of art that just maybe hadn't been heard by certain people before.
I think it has. I mean, I've even just felt with the interest in the 2 most recent tapes I've put out. I mean, as an experimental musician, your fan base is never really that big, which is totally fine. It's a niche genre, and that's how it is. But I've definitely received a lot more interest in the work in the past 2 years than I have before that. Maybe it's the fact that the work is actually good now, because I don't know if the work before was,
well, that helps.
But I think having a more captive audience, to use the phrase maybe in a weird way, certainly helps too.
Sure. Yeah. How are people finding you? I mean, like you said, you're doing a very niche genre of music, and Winnipeg again has a really good community. People are support each other musically regardless of the genre, and there's definitely a lot of kind of, I like to call it an incestuous music scene, because everyone knows each other and is in each other's bands at one point or another, and right.
For sure.
So there's that, but like just in general, how do you get the word out about something like this, which is not necessarily easy for the average person to grasp?
I mean, it was definitely a challenge for the tape that I put on Grisai. I think I sent it around. I had a list of 6 or 8 labels that I tried sending it to, that I was keen on trying to put it out on, who either, sounds good, but we have like a 2-year backlog, or you just straight up no response, which is not an uncommon situation for any musician, right?
Sure, yeah.
But definitely within the experimental genre, I think there are labels that act as sort of hallmarks of noted styles of art, right, or of music. So Grisai is one that I've known about for a while, who puts out a lot of experimental field recording, more minimal types of work, but also they have released like harsh noise wall tapes. So they have like quite a wide range of people who are interested in their work. So for me, finding a label that had a little bit of that credit, so to speak, was an important thing. And that worked out really well. I ended up connecting with a lot of artists who had made work that I'd appreciated through the years, who, had an appreciation for what I was doing. That's a big part of it. Things like Bandcamp are another great thing. Like I find that there's been so much support through that platform, and people just finding work organically.
For sure.
And also just, like local things like Send and Receive. They are so fantastic about promoting the artists that they put on. Even, years down the line, they will be promoting new work by artists who've performed in past years.
That's
so
awesome.
Again, the community here is really helpful. And otherwise, like, sounds lame, but social media, I think, again, really small part in terms of what the experimental scene is like there. Whatever that is.
That's kind of what I was going to ask next, actually, is that, like, there's got to be online communities for this, right? I mean, there's got to be people around the world who are doing similar projects. And I'm sure that the advent of the internet has certainly helped just broaden people's horizons as to what's out there.
Yeah, definitely. Even, field recording at large, I think, has been experiencing this weird surge of popularity, niche popularity online over the last few years. And I don't entirely know where that's come from. Maybe it's just the technology is getting more accessible. But yeah, I mean, just like with everything, right? The internet is a huge driver of discovery for those sorts of things. I mean, what's weird to me, though, is that the platforms that a lot of that discovery takes place on, like Instagram, for example, right, is like a photo sharing social
Yeah,
media, but like there's so much music on it.
it's
And
true.
yet
Yeah.
there's these other, social medias like SoundCloud or whatever that I don't know about you, but I find very little on SoundCloud organically. Like it seems to have just a terrible implementation for discovering things.
There's a lot of really bad rap on there that I found, and that's about it. Like,
Yeah. There's a
Bandcamp,
lot
though,
of
Bandcamp's been great for finding stuff, just like searching by genre or by city or whatever. And there's been some cool stuff I found for sure.
It's awesome. Yeah. Even just like the you might also like at the bottom of like release pages is like
Yeah,
surprisingly on point a lot of the time.
yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, whatever they're doing, I mean, they're doing a good job of it.
Well, and they also help give the artists a little bit of money sometimes, right? Just unlike a lot of
Yeah,
the
for
others.
sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, again, with experimental music, like I don't think anyone ever expects to see like a profit from any of this
Totally.
because
Yeah.
like even just the cost of pressing a run of tapes, like you'll be lucky if you break even for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's not why you're doing it though, obviously, right? So that's
No, exactly. I mean, that's one of sort of the nice things about the scene is that everyone is doing it for like the passion and love of doing it because you're not going to get rich off it. Like
Yeah.
you're gonna definitely lose money doing this. So you really have to love it.
Well, I guess that's how you know what they're doing is genuine too, right? I mean, the art's being created from a real place rather than some kind of. No one's going to be trying to sneak into the experimental music scene and try to use as a great get rich quick scheme because it's not going to work. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, to be honest, I have seen one or two like YouTube accounts where it's sort of fringing on that. Like,
Okay.
I guess more in the field recording realm because you can do things like gear reviews.
Sure.
You can get like microphone influencers or whatever. Like, I mean, I guess the internet is big enough to hold that sort of content, but yeah. I mean, for the most part, it's just a lot of genuine people who are interested in making weird shit, which is
cool.
That's
very cool for sure. Yeah. So, how do people find your stuff? I mean, is Bandcamp the best option at this point if they can't get a tape, or where would you sort of send them to hear what you're doing?
Yeah, Bandcamp is good. colepeters.bandcamp.com has 4 of the most recent ones. There's a digital there from the album on Grisai. McCade Star's Bandcamp is where you can find the latest tape that I put out.
Yeah.
And then just my website, colepeters.com, has info on all of my work, along with like the more visual side. So it's probably the best place to go. Yeah.
Cool. And then, excuse me, as far as your tapes go, I like I said, one of them is obviously the newest one's obviously sold out, which is great. Are any of the other ones floating around? Like, do you have tapes that are out there in the world that people can find somehow?
Yeah, there's one copy left of the Grisai tape on their Bandcamp. So if anyone wants it, go quick because it's the last one. And I sold my last 5 artist copies at Send and Receive. So one person out there has an opportunity for a physical copy.
Maybe by the time this actually airs, it'll be gone too, right? So
yeah,
that's cool. Do you ever have any intention of like repressing any of these, if they're or are they meant to be strictly short run?
I think I might be interested in exploring that. Another thing I've been thinking about is putting out a release of some kind of the set that I put together for Send and Receive,
Cool.
because there's both sort of from the last 2 albums, there's material on that, but arranged in a different way.
Okay.
So there might be something like that. But yeah, I think I would like to do some repress plans. But yeah, we'll have to see how it plays out and what sort of opportunity there is for that.
Well, for now, other than that lucky person who gets the last copy, everything's digital and online at this point.
Yeah, for sure. Hopefully I will have something new available sort of end of this year, start of 2022. But for now, yeah, one person has a shot.
Cool.